4 years ago, I bought my very first pet reptile, Tito, the Crested Gecko. And on day 1 I went full DIY, building him a custom tank. My experience level, 0. My confidence, through the roof. And after a few days of work, I had built a half decent tank. It wasn't perfect, but boy was I proud of my work. Over the years, the tank also held up pretty decent, albeit with a few minor hiccups. I also learned a lot in that time, and today I have a much better understanding of my gecko's need and decided to finally give her the upgrade she deserves. And all of it starts with a brand new tank I made myself. By cutting up OSB and common boards, I could quickly build a box that would form the base of our new tank. I sealed it with liquid rubber and stapled the screen to the top. A little bit of stain and the door, and tada, we got ourselves a new tank. I made a separate video about the whole process of building your own tanks, and I'll leave a link to that video in the description for those that want to learn more. Now, the new tank measures 50 cm wide, 45 cm deep and 80 cm tall, which is technically a bit smaller than a previous tank, but the way that I plan on scaping this new one should give her way more usable space. Now for this setup I really wanted the treetop feel with lots of little branches, so there's lots of spaces that Tito can climb towards. And I think I found pretty much the perfect piece of cork to get that feel. Now I'm not going to use this one alone, I have a bunch more, but I just wanted to show off this beautiful piece. I think this is a really good find. But before adding branches, I'm adding in some XPS foam panels. These will give us a surface to work on. The liquid rubber seal on the tank isn't an ideal surface for silicone to bond reliably, so to make sure it will all stay in place for years to come, I cut the panels for an extremely tight fit. So the side panels press against the back panel to hold everything securely in place. And with the silicone cured, we can now add the branches. I'm starting with the big branch from earlier that happened to just fall perfectly into place. And then played around with this cork round, but decided I had to cut it in half and then added more branches to mimic another tree growing nearby. I'm holding everything up with masking tape and scraps of XPS foam until I like what I see. Now getting the correct placement can take a couple of hours, and it's important to take your time. Once you lock everything in place, it will be hard to make adjustments. And once I was happy with the look of the branches, I added a few more scraps of XPS foam that I held in place with silicone and toothpicks to create the rough shape of rocks. Next, it's time for the expanding foam. I'm applying it all around the contact points between the foam and the branches. Alright, it's now the next morning. Everything feels pretty secure, or at least secure enough for this stage of the process. And now we need to clean up this big foamy mess, so let's get to it. First things first, let's remove all the masking tape. Now, carving is pretty straightforward. Just slowly cut away at the foam until you get a somewhat natural feeling shape. Don't worry about the color or the texture just yet. We'll fix that in a minute. Overall, just having the rough shape you want is fine for this stage of the build. That said, there is one detail I want to spend a little bit more time on. I want to include a ledge to the background that could hold a food dish. And I need to make sure we have enough space. After carving the foam, we now have the perfect base for building our background. Last summer I used the Buddy Roads vertical mix to create a background for my spotted turtle's Terrarium. I really loved using it, and for those that are unfamiliar with the product, it more or less is a specialized concrete mix made for creating zoo displays. It's lightweight and doesn't alter water parameters, making it perfect for the job. And it's also a lot of fun to use. The only con is that it can be somewhat hard to come by, depending on where you live. However, I've seen my buddy Terra Aquaman use a very similar product called Make. So if Buddy Roads isn't available where you live, you could look into that. To get the concrete to stick to the foam, a mixture of 50-50 ramp and water first had to be sprayed on and left to dry until sticky. And while I waited, I mixed up a small batch in the default grey to create our rocks. Once mixed together, you can just slap it in place and let it stiffen up for roughly 50 minutes. After that, it's time for the secret rock making technique called hitting it with a rock, where you hit it with a rock. Yeah, we're not doing rocket science over here.
Alright, it's problem time. Because what's a good project without some problem solving? Off camera I mixed up the second batch of concrete and it's all wrong. I messed it up. I added way too much water and while I was doing so, I already was feeling like, this feels like really a lot of water. I'm not really sure if I should use this much, but I did the calculations and I'm usually right, so I was just going ahead with it, and then I was adding the concrete mix. Pretty much as soon as I was adding it, I knew I was off by a lot. But I continued, I mixed it all up, and it is just completely liquid. I added double the amount of water. I did try to use it, but it's just too watery. It's way too watery. So I added the rest of the bag, which is way too much for this project. But at least now I have a workable mix, which is still a bit runny, but doable. So we're now gonna apply the runny vertical mix, and hopefully we can make something that will still work and look pretty cool.
So besides adding the rest of the bag, I also just waited a bit before adding the concrete, and that also helped a lot. So in the end, the mixture wasn't all that bad, I just had way too much of it. This diluted the pigment I added, which still looks pretty brown here, but will dry almost completely grey. Adding the concrete is also pretty straightforward. I'm just covering all the remaining visible bits of foam. The only part that required a bit more attention was, again, the feeding latch. I didn't add enough foam here earlier, so now I have to compensate with a lot more concrete. Luckily I have plenty, so that isn't an issue. I use these silicone feeding cups to mix up the food for my gecko, and to be absolutely sure they fit, I'm just gonna leave one in the background while it dries. The concrete shouldn't be able to stick to it, but only time will tell if that's really true. I wasn't gonna let any of the vertical mix go to waste, and since I was planning on using the other half of this bag in my upcoming bearded dragonscape, I just went ahead and added it to that tank already. "30 minutes later and it is carving time! If it wasn't already obvious, I really love working with this stuff. It feels a bit like playing with mud or with clay or something, but then way easier to make something nice. And recreating the texture of mud couldn't be easier. Just running a small carving tool over the surface instantly reveals the desired texture. The only thing to keep in mind is to keep changing directions as you go to prevent it from all looking a bit too uniform. And I'm not showing it here, but everything you carve off can be reused as long as you don't let it dry out completely, which is another win for this technique. Two days later, the vertical mix fully cured and it's now rock solid. There's a few loose bits here and there, but you can easily knock them off with a paintbrush.
Alright, a couple of days later and the background is completely dry. It looks really good. I love the texture. It is pretty much what I envisioned, but the color is off. It is completely gray. Well, not completely. There's still a visible difference between the untinted mix and the tinted mix, but you know, it's not the color that we want. So let's fix that with some glazes.
Using pigments helps to get the concrete in the direction you want, but using glazes will let you color it exactly how you like. I'm starting out with a diluted black that will run into all the cracks and crevices and create more contrast. Next up is a diluted brown, followed by not diluted browns and green to gradually build up that muddy look. I've seen others use yellow to create the suggestion of moss, but that's very bright, so I went over it with more brown and green to tone it down. And at this point I realized I went into glazing with the wrong mindset. I thought it would be similar to using paints, where you can dry brush on progressively lighter colors, but with the glazes being so liquid, I think you should work in the opposite order, starting with lighter colors and finishing it off with a black wash. So halfway through this build I switched techniques and I'm happy I did, as I really like the results. It's time to finish this thing, but first we need to get our sleepy gal. I plan on reusing the soil, leaf litter and some of the plants from our old tank, so I had to get her out while I work. But don't worry, she wasn't in this container for long. Now let's get to work. While I was digging out the old soil, I found something I didn't expect. Old eggs. Now, I kinda knew Tito was a girl, but I wasn't too sure, but this definitely confirms it. Anyway, once everything was out of the old tank, I added Lika to the new tank to act as a drainage layer, and covered it all with a layer of geotextile fabric. This will act as a barrier between the drainage layer and our soil. And you guessed it, the next step is adding our old substrate mix. The mix works pretty good and is a mixture of sphagnum moss, cocoa fiber, charcoal and small bits of bark. But to be sure there's enough nutrients in here, I also added a layer of aqua soil, before adding more of the substrate mix. I then also added 2 of these core crowns to help create a deeper substrate layer. With the soil in place, it's time to add some green. The first and biggest plant I'm going to add is this Schefflera, also known as umbrella plant. This one is relatively small, but they will grow much bigger, and long term they do require a little haircut from time to time. Next up is this mini tree looking plant. I'm not sure what this one is called, but I really like how its leaves contrast with the other plants. Now, I'm pretty sure it's a sin to build a Crested Gecko Vivarium without using any kind of vine plants, so I'm also gonna add some Philodendron Brazil. I got a couple of these small plants that will hopefully start growing quickly. I wanted to use bigger plants, but it's November and all the garden centers have transformed into Christmas centers, so it's a bit hard to find all the plants I want in the correct size. Next, we got a really nice big plant from our old setup. This is a Philodendron Prince of Orange. I really like the big leaves of this one. And lastly, of course, we need to add more of that Philodendron Brazil. Now, to get the full jungle look, we also need to add some leaf litter. This looks very cool, but it is also very beneficial for our cleanup crew. Speaking of which, we don't need to add them. The old tank had a very robust colony of springtails and ice spots already in there, and since we reused the old soil, they're already in this new tank, which means the only animal left to introduce is Tito herself. Now I know what you might think. The plants are very concentrated to the bottom and back of this tank. And yeah, I would have liked to use bigger plants to get the look I'm going for right away, but since I had to make it work with smaller plants, we're just gonna have to wait until everything grows in. 2 weeks later, you can already see the first small results. like the big philodendron turning its leaves towards the light. And with a little haircut, the tank looks much better. I'm super happy I could finally give Tito the upgrade she deserves, and I think she really likes it as well. And if you're hungry for more content, I recommend you watch this video next. I'll see you there.